in fact, it is innate. How do we know that? Well, there are some beautiful studies that have explored how babies respond to music. Indeed, how babies respond to specific types of music, specific frequencies of sound, spacing between particular notes, and on and on. It's been demonstrated, for instance, that babies as young as 3 months old respond to music very differently than they respond to just other forms of sound scrambled in time. Now, of course, babies that are 3 months old aren't speaking, so you could ask them, does that sound like music? How does it make you feel, etc.? They're not going to answer, at least not with any coherence, because they don't have spoken language yet. But despite their absence of language, we know that babies as young as 3 months old respond to music because they do so with rhythmic movements of their bodily limbs and actually their torso as well. Now, a little bit later, we will touch on this issue of what types of music evoke movement of the torso versus movement of the limbs versus movement of the torso and limbs. No, I'm not going to dance for you during this podcast. However, there's a really interesting story there that relates to how primitive or evolved the motor neurons, the neurons that actually move the musculature, are, and how primitive or evolved the music that one listens to is. But just to give you a sense of where that's headed, in this study where they examined the responses of very young babies to music, what they found is that certain frequencies of sound evoked movements in those babies that were rhythmic, where it was mostly their torso moving back and forth and maybe their head a little bit. Whereas other patterns of sound, different frequencies in different arrangements, evoked movement of their limbs more than their torso, and still other patterns of sounds evoked movement of their torso, limbs, and head. In other words, babies dancing. And if you've ever been to a wedding or a party or been out dancing, you will see people who include more torso versus limb and torso movement when they dance. And yes, of course, some of this relates to proficiency in dancing, comfort on the dance floor, etc. But there are some universal rules out there about how certain frequencies and patterns of sound, aka music, evokes different types of bodily movements. So starting from a very young age, prior to any instruction in terms of how to dance or what music is, babies are dancing to music. And that highlights an important point that we will return to again and again throughout today's episode, which is that the systems of the brain that respond specifically to movement, not just sound, but specifically to musical sounds, are intimately tied to the neural circuits of the body that generate movement. And this is especially important to understand when we get into our discussion about music and our sense of motivation.